All right, welcome. Show number 3. I promised I'd have an expert on board, and I do. We're going to be talking about quite a few things here, so make sure you stay tuned. It's food plots, deer management, buck-to-doe ratio, and some habitat development. We're going to jump in pretty deep, and we're going to talk about some things that a lot of people don't know enough about, and at the same time, like, we've figured it out over the years. And with your profession and with me being behind the camera and learning from a lot of people, we have accumulated a lot of knowledge.
We haven't quite figured it out because there's always something to learn, but we got it dialed in a little bit.
So without further ado, welcome to Deer Season Never Ends. On the show today, I have Matthew Stabenau. And how would you list your title? Agronomist, or what would you say?
Agronomist, agronomy manager, but been a sales agronomist for over a decade.
Okay, so let's just jump in. So Matt, tell us a little bit about what you've done professionally when it comes to soil and soil management or science and your degrees. Let's just give us a reference for who you are.
I have acquired a Bachelor of Science in Soil and Land Management and Waste Resources from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Upon graduation, I moved out to Oregon. That's right, Oregon, not Oregon, but Oregon on the West Coast, and dabbled in the wine industry, consulted vineyards, was an assistant winemaker and a vineyard manager out there. And spent about 3.5 years learning how to grow grapes, make wine, and learning a little bit about the soils and the topography out there. Then I relocated back to Wisconsin, to my roots, and from there I did some soil sampling in DeKalb, Illinois, with a few large companies. Soil sampled about 9,000 acres that first year, and then beyond that, I applied for my first agronomy role in central Wisconsin, and since then I've worked for, once I was back in central Wisconsin, I worked for 2 separate cooperatives, and then got offered a position with the largest seed company in the world, and worked for them for the last 7 years, and now I manage one of our local cooperatives here in the area.
What do you think was the biggest difference between the soil science of Oregon and Wisconsin?
Soil types are very similar. Silty clay loams. Wisconsin has a lot of fine textured, but coarse textured soils also. A lot of clays, a lot of sands here. Obviously, we had the glaciers that moved through here and created the soil types that we currently have today. That's the unique part about this part of the Midwest, is we had the glaciers that came through and created a lot of our soil deposits. On the western coast, a lot of that is volcanic activity. So yeah, they're very similar when it comes to soil types. But when you look at the soil series do differ a bit, because out there a lot of volcanic, and in this area of the woods, a lot of glaciated soils.
What do you think is the hardest soil to grow like a food plot for deer in?
Sand, heavy clay. But yeah.
Did we get some of that on Schofield's on the field? That was like more loam, right?
That was a lot of bedrock. The hardest part there is just shallow soils. Getting enough rain to keep things moving along without them burning up.
So like, when it comes to food plot, guys, one of the hardest things to know is you're not going to get it right away. It's going to take a while. And I know Matt and I, before he was all the way through school and while we were just chasing big whitetails, we tried to make a lot of food plots that we thought were successful at the time.
Yeah, we tried.
A lot of times we had, your typical success with like legumes and things like that, right? You're growing clover, that shit grows anywhere.
The biggest challenge I think it is you can be smart. Like, I went to school for it, but at the end of the day, we weren't born into the farm community. So learning the tools that the farmers have to create the success or try to establish a plot is a little bit more difficult when you're using rakes. I mean, it works. We've learned how to make it work, but clearing brush the old-fashioned way and mowing it down and using rakes to establish something.
You remember that
we
first
figured
plot?
out how it happens and how it works.
Yeah.
And I guess, what do you want and what's your expectations? That's the word I'm looking for.
Dude, I don't even know if we had expectations. You remember that?
If anything grew, we're like, yes!
When we were sitting around that day, we were talking about what we were going to put in, and you see the typical marketing. We're going to put in some deer
The
peas.
big companies.
We're going to put in this.
Pay for the seed because it's got a label on it.
That's right. Well, we got our young brother. We put him to work. Do you remember we had all those down trees? Like we basically had this woods with some hardwoods and some
It had a clearing
softwoods.
in it, and we used the clearing.
But the clearing was because we had a windstorm and it knocked all over the trees. So then we decided we're just going to go into the middle with the wind and we're going to clear it all out, and that's where the food plot is going to go. That was our first
establishing
one.
a deer plot in the middle of the woods, and you have leaf piles that are 3-4 feet tall with brush, a berm all around the entire deer plot because we didn't have a mulcher, we didn't have any of that.
Yeah, just raking it to the side, get out of the way.
Yep.
Get out of the way.
I don't even think we used herbicides at that point. Obviously I've learned
No
about
till,
no till,
hard rakes,
hard rakes,
hard work.
Yeah, and a lot of blisters.
A lot of blisters. Man, I still kind of remember what that felt like because I had them all over my hand. They were
And poison ivy.
Oh, poison ivy, my goodness. We were not prepared. Hey, but guess what? What did we have happen?
Deer came.
They sure did.
Found some really nice sheds. Harvey.
Yeah, we started to build a foundation for a better understanding of food plots after that first attempt.
I'll lead into it early, but it wasn't just us learning to try to put in deer plots. We were trying to manage the woods to house deer so they would live there year round. And that's where we started to grow our hunting, because it was no longer hunting for us. It was trying to
Habitat
educate
development.
ourselves and create something that was special for the deer. So that was our goal.
We wanted it to be a sanctuary
Yes.
for those deer, so they knew that they could come to our property. They weren't going to get educated because we don't make mistakes. We're going to come in the right wind directions. We're going to hunt them from the right stands. We had all these plans, and it was you and I, and we were literally like, we're going to force Luke to do this. We're going to do it.
Yep.
And then it was like, okay, we're going to put a food plot in here. You remember like the aerial maps, like looking at it, plotting it all off, walking the deer trails, like literally plotting out exactly what we thought would work on the property.
Bunch of maps with a bunch of scribbles.
Bunch of scribbles, late night scribbles.
Late night scribbles.
Yeah. Couple beers deep, being like, hey, you know what? This is the master plan. And then you wake up and you look at it the next day, and we've had those over the years.
Looked like two clowns were drawing on a piece of paper.
That's right. But it led us to where we are today.
Yeah.
I mean, those first food plots kind of led the way to what we did in Wausau. Right?
But, well, that's how humans learn, right?
Drive time.
You gotta do stuff enough to get good at it. I mean, they didn't create. Somebody jumped off a cliff one day and they had wings on their arms and they're like, "Hey, I'm flying." Actually, no, you're free falling, dude. And that's where aerodynamics was created. Is as humans, we learn by our mistakes and we grow from there, and that's the whole idea with establishing deer plots. Obviously, you have social media today, and you can learn from others' mistakes and get better. That's one thing about social media. But we've had some failures, obviously. Most people do fail, and they succeed when they try again. But there's a lot that we've learned.
Do you remember the most epic failure? It was mine. Do you remember?
You might as well tell me.
Schofield Field. Remember that day? I was going to put in, I don't know what it was, like 2 acres of beans, and I was tilling it, and you were helping me, or Luke was helping me. And we had tilled, and he'd got to a point he couldn't do it anymore. He's like, I got to go home. I did too much. And then I sat out there, and I tilled, and I tilled, and I tilled. But we hadn't taken soil samples because that just wasn't in our program back then. And then I put in this like super expensive bag of seed, and shit all came up. I mean, literally nothing. Do you remember that? Where Luke shot his first buck on the field.
I mean, if I had to guess, soybeans, they like moisture, that they swell, and then they grow. And if they don't have enough water to continue to do their thing,
yeah, it was dry that year,
they desiccate. So if I had to guess, being high bedrock in that situation, because it was limited soil depth, and who knows, maybe we didn't plant them deep enough. Soybeans typically like that half inch right around there, no more than an inch, that's for sure. Because as they come out of the ground with the crook, it snaps off right here, and then you just got a dead plant because the growing point's always above ground. Like this, they extend. So if you got a lot of compaction or anything here, this snaps off here, and then you basically got a dead plant. And if that's the case, we planted them too deep, which that's been a learning experience for some growers of mine and, even myself over the years. But ideally, you want half inch, 3/4 of an inch, no more than an inch. Try to get them in some moisture, but if they run out of moisture, they die. And my thought is in that certain situation that they probably ran out of water, because soybeans can germinate on the soil surface and they can root themselves, but if they run out of moisture, they're done for.
And that's probably what happened. I mean, that might have been year 2 of us trying to do food plots. We're talking 15
and no
18 years ago.
Weed management at all.
No.
We're trying to plant into an old hayfield type situation, and we probably had very little success.
So we've done it the wrong way, and we've definitely done it the right way. And a lot of it came through trial and error, drive time, knowledge building from you going to school. I mean, I did as much as I could to research and be a self-educated learner, but it pales in comparison to what you know. So let's talk about the audience. They're watching, and let's say they want to put a food plot in. And a lot of guys like us hunt swamps. A lot of guys like us hunt areas that are a little bit more difficult to put in food plots. And your new property that you bought a couple years ago and we've established had that same issue where it was lower, right? It was a floodplain very close by. And yet we still have established food plots and got them to work. What's changed? What do we know now that we wish we could have told our younger selves?
Sunlight's important, obviously. There's seed out there, clovers and stuff like that, legumes that you can plant in low light environments. But I've learned in the deer management side, obviously planting spruce trees, white spruce trees. They do not like shade, and they will die. So learning a little bit about sunlight aspect, right? Where the sun rises and it sets and the shade effect is important. I even though I'm an agronomist, I don't typically believe in soil tests. It is a waste of money when it comes to fertilizer. If you're out of balance pH-wise, then yes, most Wisconsin soils are sitting typically around a 5.5 or a 5.8 pH. That's a low pH, and you can have some issues, obviously, with that. As you get more acidic, you got exchangeable aluminum and metals that become exchangeable, and they tie up some other stuff.
What happens if it's...
But that's too nerdy, and I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, but what happens if it's not good? What do you do?
If you check your pH, if it's high, we live in a high alkaline environment. We have a lot of dolomitic limestone here in Wisconsin, especially Door County. You add sulfur if you're too high. We do have some soils that are above 7.5 in this area just because, we're high alkaline with the dolomitic limestone. But most of Wisconsin and other areas, you have to add ag lime. And there's many different forms of ag lime, in the marketplace. But adding some lime is a good way to go about it. And short and sweet of that is commercial ag fields, you can put it out there at 2,000 pounds per acre, a ton, 4,000 pounds, 2 ton per acre. That's something that you can have a commercial operation do. But in a deer plot situation, everybody fertilizes either with like cone spreaders behind a tractor or, out there hand cranking it. I've learned 200-300 pounds of pelletized lime goes a long way. You get that reaction. Obviously, like 98G on the market with calcium products is a great product out there. It's fast acting and it works, but most of the pelletized lime, it's long term. It's 2 to 3 years dispersal. A lot of people want now, today, and not going super in depth about soils, cation exchange capacities, and organic matter, but there's a buffer pH. And I recommend going to your local cooperative or somebody that has knowledge in soils. If you're at a 5.5, you can't really get to a 7.0. You can't. It's typically 1 point at a time is how things rise. So you got to start somewhere. And if you put out 2 ton per acre per year, I mean, you get above that 3 ton, 4 ton, 5 ton. Some of these soil tests recommend a lot. You start looking like you got a sandbox out there. So that's not ideal either. But there's one benefit to doing soil tests, and that's learning what your pH is first and foremost. And you can then help that side of it through some ag lime or some commercial grade, lime applications. As far as fertilizer goes, things like nitrogen, things like phosphorus, things like potassium. I'm an agronomist. I grow a lot of brassicas. And when things are looking purple, they need phosphorus. When things are looking light yellow, pasty looking, there's different identifications, visual identifications. Do they need nitrogen? Do they need sulfur? Things like that. I put urea out there, as that's my nitrogen source. If I think it might have something to do with a little bit of pale yellow and some striping a little bit. Typically that's sulfur, intervenal chlorosis type stuff. I'll add some sulfur into that. But there's visual diagnostic features that you can look online and see that it's hungry in this, that, or the other.
Like see if the plants are healthy or not is what you're talking about?
Hungry. This is good if they're hungry.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm in the woods, and don't confuse it, because like corn, for instance, you got different hybrids, and different hybrid selections can express like purpling. That's just something that's part of the ag world. But when you're growing brassicas and some of those other things, I'm going off on a tangent, but basically, starting with your soil test, making sure your pH is in balance, and then just feeding the crop you have. Using a starter. A lot of guys wing it. The best resource you have typically is going to a local cooperative and asking them, hey, what do you recommend? Most of them are honest. Some of them like to just sell you stuff. Not very experienced. But the idea is you got to feed something. You can't just plant something or broadcast it and expect it to grow. I mean, the environment's important, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. Obviously, you need some precipitation as well. And with that, you can have good success. But then also, too, you got to be concerned with pests, and whether that's pests. We've learned, when we were in central Wisconsin, darn snails or slugs in my brassicas.
Eating all those leaves.
Just
the holes.
It was bad, so I bought some slug bait, and it's salt, right? Put some salt out there, and next thing you know, you have no slugs because you dry them up.
But you got to pay attention.
So
That takes me to this.
You can't just put it out there and come back 4 months later and be like, oh, right. What happened? Because we've learned.
We've learned. So let's say you get the soil all correct. or at least as good as you can, good as you think you know, and you get some seed in the ground. I know something that you do a lot of, and I've never seen anybody else do, and nobody talks about this, is you go back and you check for emergence. Like, you go back and you make sure it's coming up, and if you don't like it, what do?
Put a little bit more out there.
Yeah, you reseed right away, like within what? How many days?
7 to 10 days typically.
Yeah, I was thinking about that 10 mark, where you're back out there and looking at it. If I don't like it, I'm putting it in there.
Another winning factor that we do, and we've incorporated this the last 3-4 years, is Josh and I will be out in the woods at 9:30, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night because it's going to rain. He helps me a lot, but we together prepare the soil. That's our seed bed, right? And then we wait. And we could wait 4 or 5 days, whatever it is, but we always are out there in the middle of the night or the day prior to a rain event.
Or planting in it. Because I've definitely gotten wet putting seed in.
When we finish, yeah, it's
bagging the top of our hand spreader so the seed doesn't get wet, but letting that whip out in the rain because it's here. We've done that.
I mean, putting seed out there and saying, I hope it rains. I've learned that be patient, because obviously patience is awesome. But we always typically now are seeding down our plots prior to a 1/4-inch rain event. I mean, when they say 60% chance of rain, you're going to get rain. When they say, 15%, 20% chance, that easily could blow over you, around you, not even get any rain. And
do you know what that actually means, those percentages? I learned this, I can't remember, like 6 or 9 months ago. So if they say 60% chance, what that means is 60% of the viewing area will get rain. Not 60% chance that you'll get rain, but 60% of the viewing area will get rain.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's crazy. So what Matt is saying is this. You figure out how much you need to put down as far as phosphorus or lime or whatever. You don't have to go and get a pH test necessarily, and you can just lead with phosphorus and putting it down. Yes?
Well, for instance, there's fertilizer guaranteed analysis in the marketplace, and depending on the products, and that's why I say consult your local cooperative. But for instance, like 5, 10, 40, 5, 15, 42, they're just NPK, right? 9, 20, 3, 30.
Hut. I have no idea what you're talking about. What are you talking about?
So there's 9 pounds, 23 pounds, 30 pounds in every 100 pounds. So you buy a 50-pound bag and it's half of that, right?
Oh,
but
gotcha.
if you buy 2 bags, 50-pound bags, you're
Okay.
getting 9 pounds of nitrogen, 23 pounds of phosphorus, and 30 pounds of potassium. That's the idea. So depending on your size and acreage, obviously I don't have a whole lot of land that's currently in deer plots besides, a 5-acre alfalfa field that's commercialized. But, the idea is you don't have to, but I always use a starter. So you put some starter out there. And we'll get into how I established the deer plots, but using a starter fertilizer, giving it something to get up out of the ground is the idea. Whether it's 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, depending on the product that you're growing, because everything requires more nitrogen or phosphorus, potassium, right, to get going. You got to give it a kick in the rear end typically. So you have a starter, you get it up, you get it out of the ground. That's where I come back then and I do a stand assessment, what germinated, what is my stand kind of looking like, is things actually growing? Because at that point, let's just say you're in a situation where you didn't do anything and you threw some seed out there and it ain't growing. I would check your pH because that could be an influence on your germination rate. I mean, or you bought some bad seed and that happens and you can do a germ test. Just put it in a wet napkin, put it on your kitchen counter in a Ziploc bag and you got 10 seeds and 3 of them germinate. 30%, right? That's terrible germination. Ideally, we shoot for 80%, 90%, depending on products. Otherwise, you just have to heavy seed it. Use more seed is the idea. But, I'll put it back to you. But the idea is you got to use some fertilizer to get things up and moving, and then you got to come back and you got to assess it.
All right. So a lot of the places where we've put food plots, you're not getting heavy machinery. There's no tractor getting there, no. Right? Maybe you can get a 4-wheeler, but a lot of times it's either like hard rake or you're pulling some sort of little implement behind like a 4-wheeler ATV. So for all the people that are out there that have like hunting plots that are in swamps or, cedar sloughs, or it's hard to get to.
Some places probably shouldn't have a deer plot. Let's just put it that way. If it's too wet, I mean, people say, "Oh, this is a great clearing." I mean, look for deer browse in natural cleared areas, and that's how I chose my spots in my woods. But depending on the drainage of that, drainage is a huge concern, obviously. And some of these areas don't get sunlight and they got very poor drainage. Seed can rot in the ground. Yeah, we have a lot of treated seed nowadays with some fungicides, but some properties maybe aren't meant to have deer plots because of environmental issues. And there's other things you can do besides deer plots, but obviously you need good drainage, and you need good sunlight to get most things established.
So when we first started your food plot on the property you own now, there'd never been food plots in those areas. And I think one of the things that benefited the most was we're driving down the road that day and we literally drove past a tiller, right?
True. Hand tiller, rear tine tiller.
You called me up and said, Josh, I just found this tiller on the side of the road. I'm not even sure if it works, but the guy wants hardly anything for it, and I think it could benefit us in the woods.
Best things sometimes are free.
And we really got that, and it revolutionized what we're able to do, because that rear tiller and how it basically broke up the root ball systems like that were in the soil. I don't know if I'm saying that correct, but
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right? Tell me about how that can actually help when you're putting a hunting plot into like a little hunting area.
So nice thing is I'll back it up just a bit, but we had a lot of goldenrod and grasses, timothy and whatever else is native to Wisconsin in this area, just growing in a little clearing in the woods. I mowed it down, let it grow back a little bit. You never want to mow it down and spray, because you've taken away a lot of surface area, and when you're trying to do a chemical application, it's hard because there's less surface area to get a catch. So letting things grow back and getting 3 to 4 inches of regrowth after mowing something down is perfect. That's ideal. But I mowed it down and I cut it down, whether we weed whacked it or we used a push mower.
A little bit of everything.
I mean, we're poor guys getting their careers going type thing, and push mowers, weed eaters, whatever it was to get the thatch cut down and the plant growth down. I did a chemical application, and the most common one out there is a pint or a pint and a half of 2,4-D with a quart to a quart and a half of glyphosate, which is Roundup basically. 32 ounces obviously is 1 quart, and 1 pint is 16 ounces. Depending on your area and hard water, you might want to put some ammonium sulfate, sprayable ammonium sulfate in there too. But anyhow, that sometimes it might be a little too much for people. But 2,4-D and glyphosate, and go at it with a backpack sprayer, and I sprayed it, and I expected results immediately, but it's slow acting. I mean, we're talking 10 to 14 days before things start turning yellow. Then I knew that I did something good. I didn't have one, and I don't. I'm gonna get one, but an ATV sprayer. When you go back there, you see the areas you missed because it's green and everything else is yellow, and so you can go back and you can spot treat some of those areas you skipped. But I let most of that die down and fall, and that's when you and I went out there with that rear tine tiller and hammered away at that, trying to incorporate some of that organic material into the soil and just break up those root balls. I mean, we're talking an area that's never had any agriculture or anything before, and the organic matter was just plush in the soil, but we incorporated all that plant material.
Hard work.
And then you got to let it sit, because it's got to decompose and it's got to do its thing. Otherwise, you just got to mat a thatch, and you're trying to pile up thatch and get it off that area you're trying to grow. It can
months.
be good.
It was months.
I mean, it can be good, some of that plant material or that thatch, because it's kind of like straw. It'll keep moisture and keep that soil cooler and more damp. but it all depends on the situation because everybody's different and everything's different. But it was some work getting that seed bed established and getting it pristine. Over the years, there's less weeds. I have less annuals, less perennials out there. Annuals are single, perennials are 2 years cycle, biennials, right? Those things. But there's less weeds today. I'd have to say the one thing that I'm dealing with now is a little bit of pigweed and foxtails. Foxtails are everywhere in Wisconsin. It seems like they've been terrible these last few years. But let's go back and just say we're not commercializing agriculture here. We're growing deer, and deer browse on some of these things that we think is a pest. They eat poison ivy. They do. There's a lot of things that we overlook that deer browse on that we're like, oh, it's a nuisance to us because it's invading something that we want to grow. But establishing it with the tillers, getting the seed bed created, gives us an opportunity to have that soil to seed contact, and that's what you're looking for when you're seeding things down. Is you got to have contact with the seed, and you got to be in some sort of moisture. So I'll leave it there because
we got the soil tilled nowadays.
Yep.
We've done the spraying and kicked down all the competitive weeds.
Sure.
Okay. We've now planted, fertilized.
Well, I haven't planted yet, but I can talk about that real fast.
Okay, let's talk about planting. So I have a specific question about that. So when you go to planting, first you have to get the seed, right? And I think a lot of people, they see the marketing that are out there and they're like, oh, I want to get some beans, or I want to get some peas, or I want to get some oats or some alfalfa or some sort of legume, right? I'm going to have brassicas come up early, and then I'm going to have some chicory, or right? And there's all this stuff out there that a person could get. Year one of a food plot, what are you planting?
I like brassicas personally. I've learned that, well, I mean, you can do clovers, right? You can do any of that stuff. And
Doesn't it help out the soil?
What's a legume?
Legume, right?
It fixes nitrogen.
It just helps it.
And it's easy to establish. You throw it on the soil, and it pretty much does its thing. And that's a big thing that people think nowadays is, and it holds somewhat true. But, you just broadcast it out there, and it's good. And if that's what your end goal is, and that's what you want, it works. You can broadcast it on the surface and mildly rake it and, dust cover it a little bit, and you can have some moderate success that way. Obviously, you can't do that with a lot of soybeans. Like we had stated earlier, they'll dry out and abort or desiccate themselves.
What does desiccate mean?
Die.
Just rot in the soil, or what?
It's death. They die.
It's like the skull and crossbones. You don't want that.
Well, when you spray paraquat on beans, you desiccate them because you're trying to, and I wouldn't recommend it because paraquat's a bad chemical. You got to be licensed for that. But the idea is when you kill something, it desiccates, right? But anyhow, and my terminology might be off, but that's what we talk about, in my facility is they desiccate, they die. But anyhow, when you're putting out there, you have your expectations, and everybody's expectations are different. Some things need a seed depth. So it's important when you're buying something that you know that, okay, this is something I can broadcast and I can put on the soil surface. It's going to do what I want.
Yeah, basically hand spread it.
But I mean, if you're putting corn out there, right, and you're broadcasting on the soil surface and you have high expectations, I would lower those expectations because the chance of that rooting, corn's just going to lay on its side on the top of the soil.
You're going to need some sort of drag behind that has some sort of depth so it's getting in there, right? Creating furrows.
So using a rake and doing some situations like that, whether it's grass, and I have a formula, and I'll just say it. If you're looking to do something and you want to improve an area and you've done some mild raking, I love meadow fescue. Meadow fescue is low growing, lower to the surface. It doesn't get super tall. But I love meadow fescue. They have tall fescue, right? They have Festoleum, which is a cross between two different varieties. But I love meadow fescue. I love it. Timothy's another one. Deer do love Timothy. There's a lot of good things in forage quality in Timothy. Timothy likes water. Red clover obviously grows just about anywhere. My typical thing, if I'm seen down in an area, because I have a little campsite out in the woods too, so that way I can get some work done in the springtime. But it's meadow fescue, it's Timothy, it's a little bit of red clover in there. Typically when I'm seeding down, I'll use some annual ryegrass or some Italian ryegrass and perennial ryegrass. That's typically what I'll use a little bit out there. And whether or not you want to put some white clover or anything like that with it, that's my typical recommendation in the woods if you're just looking for some chow for some animals, because you don't have a whole lot of time to invest. It's fairly affordable. It's quick growing. The annual ryegrass germinates faster. It gives way and provides a seed bed for some of those other seeds that germinate a little bit slower. That's my recommendation in the woods. Now, if you're looking for something a little bit more, I like to use brassicas now. Nobody around me is typically growing brassicas, and I'm trying to complement a food source that they don't have, right? I have a lot of alfalfa around me. Otherwise, it's in a rotation with corn. We have a lot of dairy in our area. I'm trying to choose something that, okay, they can go out and they can graze on the alfalfa field and they can get their protein off of the alfalfa field. And I look at deer the same way that I look at dairy cows, is they have a nutritional need that they need, and lactating does, right? Does that are going to have offspring for healthy yearlings are very similar too. You want to provide them that forage quality. You want to provide them that protein. And protein's very important. People talk about protein. People talk about minerals growing deer antlers. It's something to look at, especially, you have corn that's growing out there, and for our area, it's a lot of corn silage. That corn silage typically starts coming off about that second week of September. Then there's no food. I mean, yeah, there might be a few kernels here and there, or a few cobs that didn't make it.
Same thing with alfalfa. You get to about that second week in November.
Oh, it's
not growing anymore. It's not quite as palatable. Like, they're not hitting it like they were in October.
Well, some of these guys take a late harvest, and there could be mecca deer on that field, and we've seen it on camera. There's just, 30, 40 deer on a field, and they take it off, and you're like, where'd all the deer go? And we've had that conversation many years. Where'd the deer go? We were strategic. We're like, hey, we're going hunting this weekend, yada, yada, yada. And then Thursday, they take the alfalfa off, and we're like, the deer are just gone by the time we wanted to get out there. So there's some challenges with commercial agriculture, because whether they're grain farmer, they're taking the grain off later, soybeans, whatever it is, it's provided for them through in the growing season. It's out there, but they have that opportunity to, let's just say, in my brain, my world right now, you can go out and they can have some alfalfa, then get some little morning greens, and then they're like, hey, let's go over here and we're going to bite on a few cobs of corn because it's, in milk, and sweet corn, right? It's in milk, and, this is great. And I can cross the road and I can go have myself some green beans, some soybeans. Oh, and then let's stop at Matt's property because he's got some green lettuce or whatever I'm growing out there, right? Some more greens. It keeps them moving in a circle because there's a diet they need. So, if they're going from bed to corn, bed to beans, bed to alfalfa, now they have more opportunity to have something depending on what they want. So I always try to complement or offer something slightly different than what's commercialized around me.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
If the neighbor's growing corn, I probably shouldn't have corn on my property.
Probably not. There's enough to go around then.
And if it's off or early, I mean, a lot of people
what happens if, right, they 90-day corn, what is it, 82 what's the shortest?
The 82 would be shorter than the 90-day.
Right, but so now it's like, okay, well, let's say you talk to him. You communicate to your neighbor and you say, hey, when are you pulling that off?
You're taking it for silage, you're taking it for grain.
All that matters. It also matters
Grain's going to be later than the corn silage.
Right. Alfalfa matters too, though. You talk about, okay, well,
are you going to take a late harvest?
And can you? For my bow hunting, please. Because if you can get them to take a late harvest and let that last one get as lush as possible, and you have that window.
The better thing would be is they don't take that late harvest because now it's just tall.
Yeah. Or leave a strip right in front of your bow stand.
And you can do that, and I've talked about that. Guys that are chopping corn silage or taking grain off. If you're hunting an
Pay
area
for the rows.
and you're leasing land, why not approach that farmer and say, hey, what's it going to take if you leave me 6 rows, 12 rows of corn near my deer stand or how you want it? Whether you gun hunt, muzzleloader hunt, or bow hunt, but communicating with your farmer. Yeah, he's going to sell it to you, and you can hit up his DMs and I can help you with what the cost of corn silage, or you can look online and figure out what a bushel of corn is, and ask him what his average yields are. But the idea is a farmer is typically, if you offer him a fair value, he's not going to say no because he's still getting his money worth off of that crop. But asking a farmer, hey, can you leave me some soybeans? Can you leave me some corn? Can you stay away from my deer stand and just give me a little bit more growth on that alfalfa? Is a good thing, because typically, depending on what that fall may be, and let's talk about alfalfa, if we get cold really fast, you're not going to get a lot of whole green up going on and a lot more regrowth on that alfalfa, and it's just gonna be a limited stand for the remaining part of your bow season, and that's a kick in the pants. And the farm I lease off my 5 acres that I have, and it's currently in alfalfa, and that's a conversation that I'll be having is, if they put it into corn, even though I'm planting trees out there too, is to try to allow them to leave me some sort of food for my muzzleloader season, because I do love muzzleloading, and having some corn out there is fantastic.
And this 5 that he keeps referencing, it's butted up against what, 60?
It's a whole 40, so I just bought 15 of a 40 acre.
Yeah, so
but
it's
around me across
55.
the road, there's more agriculture.
But what I'm saying is there's a whole 40 of alfalfa. And he has that back portion, which is, I don't know how many acres, 9?
Well, it's butted up to a swamp that I don't need to say, but
right.
Let's just say 3,000 acres of swamp.
Yeah, big bucks.
And I'm the first 40 coming off of that swamp, and I provide agriculture.
I wonder how you got so lucky to have that property.
Well, I could tell you real fast.
I'd love to hear it.
So I went to school for land management, and I went online and researched the individuals that owned the land around that. And the idea is the majority of the landowners that owned land around what I was being offered by the Mr. Farmer was of 60 years old and better. So the likelihood of them retiring and selling more property, because that's always better, right? You gain more property over the next few years. Everybody that had bordering property was of 60 years or older of age. I would not buy a piece of property if it's just a 40-acre woods in the middle of a half a mile or a mile. Yeah, there's deer that can bed, but we're talking now you got to manage a small selection of deer population. I'm a big fan of large timber. There's more deer, and this is a large timber attached to something I was offered with an opportunity to build my acres, because the age class of people owning land nearby was of retirement age. So looking at plat books, getting their name, using some of
You did your research.
I did my research. Looking at some of the software that we have out here, Hunt Stand, and some of those other, databases that you can look at. Looking at your DNR site, right? Department of Natural Resources. They have names out there, and then just going under Yellow Pages and just starting to search humans and seeing who they are, and just kind of snooping a little bit, I guess. And that's how I decided to buy my parcel.
I have 3 things about food plots, and then we'll put it to bed. And we'll just kind of hit these quickly. So you put in your first food plot, your hunt plot, you're basically on your kill station, because that's a small little area. It all came up. What do you do between seasons? Do you do anything at the end of the season, or what do you do right away in the spring then to get it ready? That's number 1. And then number 2, you are what you eat. So when you talk about chemicals and you talk about this stuff, I want you to talk about those 2 things. So number 1, what do you do after the first year to get it ready for year 2? And then, how do you have that conversation with people about how detrimental chemicals can be when they're used at the wrong time, the wrong situation? I think that's really important for the audience to know.
I've been wanting to say this. So obviously expectations, like I had said previously, year 1, year 2, year 3. Obviously, as time progresses, you have less weed pressure or pest pressure. So year one, your expectations should be a lot less. Year two, your expectations a little more, and then so on. But that first year we were talking about, we're trying to decrease the plant material, the thatch layer, getting that seed bed built. What I've learned in my current situation with my land, and I had a tractor, but it was too big because I have some wet soil out there and I didn't want to bury it. You know, a 10,000 pound tractor in a woods is a little bit big. So currently looking at getting myself, ideally, most ideal tractors for woods work is 25 to 35 horsepower. You can get them in most tight spots and you can do quite a bit of work with them on a small scale. I got three separate deer plots. I'd say the one is maybe it's growing in size every year, but it's probably approaching near half acre. And then I got, something that's maybe a tenth of an acre, and I got another one that's maybe 2/10 of an acre, and then I got that alfalfa field too. But the idea is year two, same thing. If you got a spot spray and use a little bit of glyphosate 2,4-D, you can do so. But what I've started to realize now in year 7 going into year 8 is I don't have to use chemicals. I recommend that people, as they're driving on the road, my head's all beeping bobbing because I drive a lot of country, I'm selling and working with a lot of farmers, which is nice. And that's how I found my land, is obviously working with customers. But there's a lot of tillage tools laying around farms. And I had a customer of mine that had a few spike tooth drags. And I own an ATV. And I purchased one, and then I got 2 more. And one of them needed to be rebuilt, so I rebuilt it. So I have 2 of them. And what I do is, ideally where I want to be is I want to leave a spike tooth drag on every single plot that I own, because then I have some sort of drag there. But I don't have to spray chemicals anymore, as he was alluding to, is, biomagnification is chemicals can build up in things that we eat, and then it can bioaccumulate type, it's not bioaccumulation, but it can accumulate in us too. Same when they talk about mercury in fish, and, the bird eats the fish, and then the bird has more, and then somebody shoots the bird, and then they have more because it accumulates. But I started to think, okay, if I'm out here and I'm spraying my herbicides early in the morning or late in the evening, once it kind of damps off, dampening off, which that means drying, you don't think deer are out there browsing on that?
Of course they are.
Of course they are. So now you have a deer out there, and glyphosate is basically dish soap, and there's a lot of, and I don't want to go too deep into that because people are going to hate me, but, glyphosate is basically dish soap, and it's what it was formulated for to begin with. Monsanto reformulated it. You got to buy something that's labeled for a crop or for consumption. The stuff that they sell at Menards or Walmart, you don't buy weed killer there.
That's where all the
It kills everything. I had a customer buy some Roundup weed killer at Walmart or Menards.
That's how people are getting cancer too, right? Where all the lawsuits are from?
I don't know. The lawsuits that they show of somebody spraying glyphosate, they're in a PP Foley respirator and they're spraying grapes. You spray glyphosate on grapes, it's all dead. You don't do that. They're spraying a fungicide, and they pulled a picture off the internet trying to get some sort of marketing.
But he's saying it gets a little ridiculous with some of the...
You're not going to wear a respirator. You're not going to wear from shoes to your head PPE and wearing a respirator spraying glyphosate. And you wouldn't be applying it to grapes, to a vineyard, because you're going to just kill everything, and that's $1 million crop. Like, you're just not going to do that. They're spraying a fungicide. That's what they're doing. They're spraying for downy mildew. But anyhow, so basically what I do is I drag it, and I use brassicas. There's a time frame, Wisconsin and Michigan, ideally, that you can seed down brassicas, and it's July to August. And I've realized if I wait too late in August, I don't get the rains, I don't get the heat. Heat's very important. I like that regrowth. So every year I've been getting a little closer. And I want to say this is like year 3 or 4 that I've been doing my brassicas, and I'm really liking it because I'm doing it typically now around July 7th, July 10th. And I can get my brassicas, I kid you not, 2 feet, because they love nitrogen. They love nitrogen. Some people, I take pictures and they're like, oh, your stand population's too thick. No, it's not, because the deer are naturally thinning it by browsing it. And if you give anything some fertilizer, it grows. And the deer will naturally thin it out because I have a lot of deer that browse on it.
Can you burn it out by putting too much on?
I don't think you would be putting that much out. Let's just say that. I mean, if you can, a lot of people think, well, you got to see it to know it's there, and in some sense, yeah. But ideally, it's not like you're walking across gravel and that's how much fertilizer you need out there. You just, when you can see it out there, and let's say you have a prill or a pelletized piece of fertilizer, and you have some every few inches, life's pretty good because it's got to become soluble, and
Well, that's nice.
So you,
So you
same
want
thing
to
with
see it every couple inches.
same
That's
thing
what you
with
want to see.
same with seed and seed down. Everybody seems to think that you need to see it. Well, when you're using clovers and brassicas, you can't see it, and they're just like, oh, let's just put it out here, right? You don't, and that's where you can seed too heavy. Most of these products is about 8 pounds per acre on brassicas. People will say that's too much. You should be using 4 to 6 pounds or 4 to 5 pounds, and you're probably right. But I'm in a high doe populated area, and they naturally graze and they thin. So I like a little bit more. But the idea is if there's more out there, you have more competition, you should have some more nitrogen. So I'll buy a bag of AMS, ammonium sulfate, because they like sulfur too, and then a bag of urea, and I'll just put it out there. I don't use the whole bag because I only have a half acre or something like that. But I do multiple, if I'm out there 2-3 times, whatever, I have my own thing. But the thing is I split my applications when it comes to the nitrogen side. But back to that spike tooth drag. I've been spike tooth dragging my property every spring. Once it kind of dries out, I'll drive around with the ATV and I'll drag it. And the idea is any little bit of brassicas that maybe went to flower and seeded themselves or whatever, I can drag it and turn it into bare dirt. I keep it pretty much so bare dirt until I'm ready to plant. And prior to planting, if this is the day that I'm going out there and I'm getting ready to plant, I'll drag it, once with my four-wheeler until I think it's nice and powdery. And I might put the drags down, 3 inches just so I got, if there's any crusting or anything, have it busted up. Then actually what I'll do, park the four-wheeler off to the side, and I'll go out there and I'll spread my seed. And if I want to spread the fertilizer at that time, which I typically will, I'll go out there and I'll spread it. I set my drag then typically really light because with brassicas, we're looking for a 1/4 inch. Typically, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, somewhere in there. 1/2 inch probably would work depending on your soil type. But you don't want to put it under the ground too deep because it's going to come up looking sick and hungry. But I'll set my drag really light and then I drag it. And I'll even put some soybeans in it too. And that's the whole idea is try to get them incorporated in the ground. And what I've realized is where that spike is dragging across soil surface is like a furrow. And you can get that soil depth on some of them soybeans with a spike tooth drag. It's super cheap. I think I got mine for $75 from a farmer. And I drag it and I just let it be. I have the best looking brassicas I've ever had in my life just by non-using chemical. I've established them. I have very little weed pressure. And just using this drag and getting things prepped, getting that seedbed prepped early on in spring, keeping it clean, start clean, finish clean is the idea of most agriculture. And then just using this drag to do my work, my bidding for myself. And it's been amazing. I know it's going to rain tonight and I'm out there doing this and then we get some rain and honestly, I'm out there, midweek, whatever, and I have some tiny little seeds, brassicas coming out of the ground, and life is good. That's success.
It's like hanging a set in the rain. It's for a reason.
Sure. So, I mean, that's what I'm doing is I get a spike tooth drag. You can get a harrow. You can get a lot of different things. But there's equipment out there, and most of them are just sitting on a rock pile behind a barn. And if you have a neighbor that your family knows, just go and say, hey, a lot of people think things are worth a lot of money nowadays, and I see spike tooth drags being sold for $150, $160 on the internet, on Facebook. When I can get stuff for free because it's just junk and maybe the guy likes to drink beer and you buy him a 30-pack of beer. I mean, we're talking $20, $30 and some people are greedy, some people aren't, and most of these farmers just like a buck or two, and as long as you appreciate them, they'll appreciate you. And it doesn't hurt to just go knock on a door and ask your neighbor, hey, do you have something that I could use? And spike tooth drags are where it's at. I love my spike tooth drags. I'm going to retrofit my four-wheeler so I got some larger spray booms because using a 4-gallon backpack sprayer is getting old and it's too much work. Obviously, I have a tractor in mind and I plan on getting one here in the near future. On my 5-acre field, because we're going to probably dip into habitat development here real fast, but that's how you establish deer plots is you're going to start with something and don't set your expectations too high that first year, because good things come with time. And, here I am going into year 8 with my property, and it was woods, and now I have something that's beautiful. And we can post pictures. I can send some pictures, of what
drone,
my
we got all kinds of
deer
stuff,
plots look like. But, it's bare dirt, organic dirt, when I'm working it. And when the brassicas growing, I mean, we're talking leaflets that it's gorgeous. It looks like Swiss chard. Or giant hosta leaves. It's just beautiful. And with that, I'm going to just say real fast too, there's an expectation when people plant, turnips or rutabagas or sugar beets, is they think, oh great, I'm going to have a lot of deer. It takes time for deer to understand and find that there's a food source. People have expectations that the first year they're going to have mecca deer because they now just put a deer plot in the woods. They don't understand that there's generations of deer that have a food source because it's been there for decades.
And they've been taught by the other deer around them
Correct.
where to go.
This is where we go for our food. It's through that transition when they come and they browse through your property through different parts of the season that they're like, oh, wow, there's something here and it tastes really good. And then they start utilizing and using that food source. It takes time. It's classical conditioning in that sense, Pavlov. But the idea there is you have to educate them and let them know that there's something delicious on your property. So have lower expectations, and it takes 2 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years for them to realize and understand. And typically it starts after that first year when they rot in the ground and you can smell those turnips and radishes, that there's something below the soil surface or there's something under that snow that they can dig for.
Key indicator where they know that something's there.
They just don't know something. There's a carrot under the soil surface, and they got to.
But they've never seen a carrot.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of guys, and I just had a guy last week in the office saying, I planted some and I didn't have much success, and it's like, give it time, be patient, because, everybody knows what a carrot is, and if there's a carrot buried underground, you won't know there's a carrot there when it's buried with snow unless you know that there's carrots there every year. So give it time, educate the deer, and let the deer understand that you do have food source. And it may take some time for them to understand that because you're educating deer to that you're supplying a food source. With the brassicas, it's typically late season. Yes, they're out there, they're getting the greens like I had mentioned early on when they're foraging because diversity is good. But typically I see more activity during late season bow hunting, muzzleloader, and shed hunting. The idea of our food sources as well is to house deer year round, so we have an opportunity to shed hunt. The deer usually, and I'm doing habitat management and building windbreaks and things like that, so I can house more deer because they go into the thicker woods where there's less snow, there's a windbreak, things like that. That's important too. But every day they come out to these plots and they're eating something because now I've provided food and protein, like I was saying earlier with those does. Protein's important, and you want healthy deer and you want healthy herd. It's kind of like dairy cattle is you're trying to give them high quality forage and you're trying to give them protein. So when you're selecting deer plot seed, it's important to look at some of those things too, because people just look at a food source. You want healthy animals, provide high quality forage, and provide a lot of protein for them, and you'll have a lot of nice antler growth too, and healthy animals.
Do you remember, is this year 5?
Yeah, it was year 3 of us chasing him.
Right,
we shot him, I think, in year 4.
Okay, so this might have been year 6.
Because he was a 9-year-old, and if this was the year before, so this was an 8-year-old deer, supposedly.
2 years before or 1 year before?
I think it was the year before, because you killed him the next year.
2, though, right? Because didn't we find the one with Luke?
Well, we found that other shed, and where we found that other shed was very near to the area you harvested.
Well, that's right. That's how we found his core area, is going back in and finding it.
Push.
Yep. All right.
So that's a little bit about deer plot and seed.
Just a little bit
We can-
about
we
deer
can-
plots and seed.
We can do a
So,
little bit more on that, but
let's do this. This is the 1.0 of having Matt on the podcast and talking about food plots. But what I need you to do is in the comments, if you have questions, if you write those down.
that we can talk about.
Yeah, a couple episodes from now, I'll have him back on and then we'll cover those. But literally, like, a lot of people don't understand what it takes to establish food plots, the effort needed, the seed, and the basic understanding of it. Matt went into a lot of it today. And I'm sure there's some higher knowledge type questions that the audience can ask. So please do hit us up in the comments. I want to switch to deer management and buck to doe ratio. And I'm going to start somewhere where both Matt and I.
Maybe disagree.
No.
Or agree.
This first one we're going to agree, I'm pretty sure. Okay. This first one is the 25 deer per square mile that the DNR have put in place and what that means. Can you talk to me about like the buck to doe ratio or deer ratio in general per square mile and how absolutely insane it is?
So I've learned over the years that I manage my own herd. And typically on my 15 acres, does fight too, just like bucks do. And I always select a healthy doe. And typically how I go about doing that is the offspring, in the spring. Obviously, I would prefer to have a doe that's healthy, that has 2, maybe 3 yearlings every year. I'm not going to select a doe that has 1 offspring every year. She's not as healthy as the other one that has 2 or 3. So I will harvest that doe that has 1 yearling. I specifically try to keep on my property a doe that has 2 or 3 yearlings. It's a healthy doe, and now I have a population that I can build upon. A doe will push another doe off the property. You've probably seen them on camera where they stand on their hind legs and they fight. And that's a real thing. But building my food source, building some habitat, it allows me to house a doe, on my 15 acres that I have, with the idea the rut comes around and when she's in full estrus, she's bringing bucks to my property, and that's how I'm managing my success is I have a doe. She does not leave my property. She knows who I am. I know she does, because when I'm out there working, I'll be out there driving my lawnmower or whatever the heck it is, and she's grazing 60 yards from me and just like, hey, what's up, Matt? I've educated her that I'm not a threat to her because I'm not killing her. And that's one thing too about passing on deer too is educating them. And it's funny, you see memes out there, but deer just think that they're out there and they can do anything they want because you're not pressuring them, you're not shooting at them, you're not doing anything. But the idea is I like to eat deer, and if I don't have an opportunity to harvest a buck, I like to eat deer, and I can shoot a doe every year because there's an opportunity, because I'm building my own population. So, manage your own deer is what I'm getting at first. I have a doe. I always keep a doe on my property when she gets too old. I'll honestly shoot her because Josh and I, this might be a weird thing. We've shot multiple doe over the years that had nub bucks, and those nub bucks stick around.
Every time.
It's odd.
I've never seen them leave.
It's odd. Now, they might get kicked off when they're the youth, but they always come back to their home ground, isn't it? Obviously, there's a dominant deer, and it's going to push them.
People are going to say in the comments, oh, how do you know that? Well, let me tell you. Do you know something that doesn't change on a deer? The white patches. You can literally see them when they're a young deer. The white patches they have on their chest and the white patches they have around on their eyes. They're all unique.
So I look at a lot of my mounts, and you look at the ring on their nose or their muzzle, and I've looked at all the deer on my wall, and that black line that goes down is unique. It's like a fingerprint on every deer too. So over the years, I've started to kind of look at that, depending on quality of cameras that you have. But I have some that have fangs. I have some that have goatees. They're all slightly different. It's like a fingerprint right behind their nose, where each deer might be based off of genetics too and family type. But that ring and underneath their jaw, because some of them protrude, and that's where I'm saying you get the fangs, or it goes all the way around underneath here. But every deer is slightly different on my wall, and it's super odd. But that's one way to identify them too. But managing that doe. She gets too old. Let's just say, okay, we harvest the doe. Now we have an opportunity for that fawn. It'd be yearling because we don't shoot does that have fawns. To come the next generation. Now, yeah, that yearling might get kicked off because there's a more mature dominant doe. But they always come back to their home area where they were born. But going back into what he had said, the idea is
Talk about the math.
25 deer per square mile. So if people don't know much about acreage, there's 16 40s in 1 square mile. How many people own a 40? Not me. Okay, so I own maybe almost close to a 20. So now,
let's just say one person owns each 40.
So now we're talking about a bunch of people that have 20 acres.
So that's 16
So now
people
you
in that square mile.
You have 32 landowners, right?
Okay.
And there's 25 deer per square mile. So you have 32 landowners fighting over 25 deer. Guess what, guys?
How many of those are mature bucks?
You're not going to get deer this year. That's just, and let's go back to 25 and 16. So there's 25 deer per square mile. There's 16 40s. How many people own 40 acres and they're the only one that hunts on it? How many people own 40 acres and they have 4 people that hunt on it? Okay. So what I'm getting at is your expectation about shooting a deer every year is it not going to happen? Will your party shoot a deer? Yeah, more than likely. But not everybody's filling their tags. And that goes back to me saying manage the deer on your property, because if I'm out there hunting and I see 5 deer and I shoot all 5 deer, it takes years for you to build that deer population back up. Now, if you're smart and you're like, I like to shoot a deer a year and I like to hunt public woods, which him and I do, just to not harvest every deer on our property. We hunt different areas for a reason, so we can put meat in our freezer because some places are overpopulated. But people seem to think that this last year, you get a buck tag and you get 3 doe tags with your bow, and then you get another buck tag and 3 doe.
You should just take all 4.
You should just harvest 6 or 8 deer. We're in farmland management, but every tag that the DNR give you, you should just fill every tag. Well, those are the guys probably in the next 1 to 2 years that are saying, I ain't seeing any deer, I ain't getting any deer. Well, no kidding. You just shot every deer within the entire area, because some deers don't just live on your property. Deer don't live on your property.
Sometimes they just travel.
They're traveling, they're transitioning through your property because of this, that, and the other thing. And, while I'm thinking about it is the more opportunity you can give a deer to spend on your property. Let's say a deer is passing through your property and you spend in 30 seconds, a minute. These things we're talking about with food sources, habitat management, all these things. If you can turn 30 seconds into 3 minutes, if you can turn 30 seconds into 5 minutes, that you can keep a deer on your property. We use mock scrapes. We do a lot of different things on our property because the idea is we're trying to intrigue an animal to move around our property, using his nose, doing whatever, providing food sources where these deer are hanging out. It's like you go into a bar on a Friday night and checking out women. If there's a lot of women in every corner, you're probably going to go check out every corner. Now, if there's one hot biddy out there and you go up and you talk to her, kind of like your deer plot, you're going to talk to her and then you're leaving. But we try to provide as much opportunity for a buck to entice them to stay longer on our property. The longer you can keep a deer on your property, the better odds are you of shooting that animal and harvesting that animal.
So check this out.
But
25 deer.
But 25 deer and 16 40s. Let's just say that everybody has a doe on their property and there's 16 does. And you know as well as me that there are not 9 bucks in 1 square
No, that's
mile.
what I was going to get at. Worse yet.
Say there's 20.
We're monarch guys. Like, we're looking for the biggest deer that we could possibly shoot. How many of those 25 deer are a monarch? 1?
Maybe. Considering how many miles, and Michigan University has done a lot of great research on collaring deer and seeing how they move. And I could be wrong, but I'm just going to throw it out there. 3 to 5 miles.
That's during the rut.
Right.
That's during the rut. That's not when they're pressured. That's not when they feel like they've been educated.
This guy here didn't go far.
8 acres?
Maybe.
At the most.
Right.
And he would move the first 10 minutes of every day
He was more
and
nocturnal.
sit till dark.
More nocturnal.
And the only reason why...
Because he was with a doe.
Yeah.
He was with a doe.
Got stupid for 5 minutes and it cost him.
But back to that population thing. 25 doe, 1640s. What I'm getting at is there's not going to be enough deer to go around. Manage your own deer because...
yeah, don't take the word for it that's coming down.
It's important because we're having... I'm going to say degradation again, but cedar... we got a lot of browsing going on cedars. Got a lot of dogwoods. I have cedars on my property and I have dogwoods, and there's species that I can go into in different episodes that are high habitat management. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit, but there's things that deer like to browse on. And looking at browse lines and looking at what they're physically eating when you're walking your own property or walking public land is super important. And that was the reason I chose my land, because I have heavily red osier dogwood. They love that stuff. I have some popples. I have some honeysuckles, some birch, some aspen, which are the popples, a little bit of maple, soft maples, and I have cedar trees and I have a few spruce trees. But the idea is I'm building up habitat. But anyways, you look at that browsing area. There's not many deer to go around when you think of 16 per 25. Let's just say there's 20 does and there's 5 bucks. There's 16 guys out there that want to fill a tag and shoot a buck, and there's only 5 of them. So your expectation should be, hey guys, you're probably not going to shoot a buck and you should manage it. But with that being said, if you provide food, you provide habitat, you provide all these things that we've briefly talked about, the odds of you successfully shooting that deer versus your neighbor significantly improves. And that's what this all is about, is there's opportunity in the woods, whether it's habitat, food plots, creating more curiosity through licks, through mock scrapes, bedding opportunities. I house does on my property, so now there's an interest there where they come every year probably to find my girls in my woods. But those are things that are all important that provide success to us.
Wouldn't you say this? It's more important to harvest the right deer than it is the wrong deer. And what I mean by that is this. I mean, you aren't shooting 2.5-year-olds.
No, we're not.
And let's say that 5 bucks and 20 does is a real thing. And one of those is a 4 or 5-year-old.
True.
We're looking for him. But you and I will eat our buck tag and shoot 2 or 3 does and stack the cooler and have a great season regardless. And then we might hunt other counties, or we might take weekend trips somewhere else because we're not seeing what we want on satellite cameras. We're not seeing what we want sitting in the stand. We're going to go out and we're going to find deer that are worthy of harvesting, deer management style, right? And that could end up on the wall, while also knowing that what's the real reason that we hunt.
I just love being out there.
Yeah.
My dad always said, and we've said because our dad has passed, is you're 16 feet closer to heaven.
Well, I like to say 25, but I get up there kind of high.
But there's a lot of things you can do to maximize your success. And, at the end of the day, hunting's about being outside and enjoying it and the camaraderie with your family. And that's something that us as brothers truly enjoy is just being out in the woods, whether it's seeing deer, turkeys, squirrels, grouse, a fisher. You don't get too many opportunities to see those, but I have. Raccoons, whatever it may be, it's exciting when you have an owl or... I had a story. I almost had a hawk take my glasses off my face. But seeing wildlife is pretty awesome, and that's one of the reasons I enjoy it. Any day they say like fishing or hunting is better spent in the office, and that's a true story. True. Whether it is taking a nap and you're seeing the back of your eyelids, but sometimes that's the
Our older brother Shane was always good for that.
I like to take a nap too sometimes.
I do not nap. I literally stay up
But if
24/7.
if I'm napping, I'm meditating because my ears are on full alert and I hear that twig snap and it's freaking game on.
I'm meditating. Oh,
I am not in dead sleep
rich.
because I'm just resting the eyes and I'm just sitting there.
Sure.
And as soon as I
Ready to
hear
go.
that rustle, or it's like game on.
Hip toss.
It's
Grab the bow.
and we could talk about that, how you prepare yourself to get in, because that's one thing we've learned too about deer hunting is how do you prepare for that shot. You know, when is it too late? When is it too late in the turn? I have a buddy that tells me, "Yeah, I watched this deer come all the way in, and he sat at 20 yards and looked at me. Well, what'd you do? Nothing. I was watching him. You didn't have your bow in your hand. You weren't standing up. Your hips weren't turned. You weren't doing anything. Like, I don't know if deer's at 20 yards, I'd probably already be at full draw." And we've learned that over the years that
5-second rule.
Draw on everything that comes in on you, so that way and you can build that confidence that you can shoot
New
it.
hunters, I talk to them about this all the time. You should be practicing and educating deer when you're a new hunter, trying to figure out the dynamics of pulling your bow back.
Go sit in your best friend's stand and draw as many deer as you can to
educate
bust
his
them.
deer on his property. Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. One other thing.
So we talk about holding off. We talk about deer management in general. But like whenever we hunt a new property, our expectations are low. It's always been that way. We've always said we're going to be on a 3 or 4 year plan.
It takes a while to learn out how they move.
But then also we want to judge the deer in the area. It's too often where, let's imagine you buy a new piece of property and somebody hasn't hunted in a while or something like that.
Let's use
And
him, for instance.
you shoot a big deer, right? And then you think every year it's just going to happen. Or you shoot this one big buck out of a stand and now it's your big buck stand. That happens, right?
Some places, yeah.
Sometimes you see a deer like this when he's like 4 or 5.
He was bigger when we first saw him.
Yeah,
he started going
180, let's say, when we first found him. He was huge. Bullwinkle. That's why we gave him the name.
He was a lot bigger than this.
And the chase was on. But we still shot bucks in the years we were chasing them. Not me, but you.
Yeah, double Mac.
Yep. I chased this deer for 4 years.
4 years.
Before I got him. I ate tags for 4 years because this was the only deer, as far as bucks go, that I was willing to shoot. And a lot of times we would go out to Stevens Point or Wausau or where have you. Like we would hunt in Madison. We would hunt in all these different counties across Wisconsin.
Brown County.
If they didn't match up to this deer, I'd let them walk. And I would film them. Do you remember? I would come back to the cabin or to your house or my house, and we would literally share video, and you'd be like, dude, you just passed a 140.
And 135s.
Yeah.
Easily all day, it's easy to pass up a 125 because, I can't eat the antlers.
But a lot of times I'd come in and remember Schumacher that year when he saw that one deer, and he's just like, Stabenau, how did you pass up that deer? It's like, because I wanted this one.
Sure.
I wanted the challenge of this. And it wasn't like we weren't seeing him. We were seeing him, but he was always better at chess than we were until he wasn't.
The only time that we saw him was pushing does.
Pushing does because he was nocturnal all the time.
He'd always come through early in the morning. I would get to my stand and this sucker would come through 15 minutes later. In the dark.
We're out there an hour and a half early, so he's coming through in dark.
I'm out there at,
but we have a camera
4:30 and he's walking
away.
in at 4:45 behind me.
Yeah.
Being near walking the same trail, he was a smart deer.
He was a smart deer. You know what put him down? Hanging a set in the rain. Moving it because I saw a big deer, but I wasn't sure what it was.
Well, and I was out there trying to push a deer, and I pushed this deer, and I
giving
said,
him a couple days.
You need to hang a set here because I heard
moving
antlers.
the set at night.
It was all night, yeah.
So the deer's in the field.
Yep.
Pouring freaking rain. I'm talking monsoon rain. I'm like, I'm moving this stand now.
He hangs a lot of sets in the middle of the night when the deer aren't in the woods. They're out on the egg fields. Or he does like the opportunity of going out there in the pouring rain. I'll
text you when I leave, and you'll be like, be safe.
I've been a little bit relaxed these last few years because I own my own land, but I hunted my land after I got double Mac and didn't really hunt this deer a whole lot because I was hoping for more success.
Do you remember
on my
this
land,
phone call?
Which I've had success.
This phone call? I was like, I got him.
Yeah, I
I
pulled
shot
up and he's
Bullwinkle.
laying in the grass crying.
Are you sure?
He was
And
all,
I was
all
like-
sorts of everything, which was pretty epic. It was
When you
quite the
immerse
moment.
yourself into a hunt where the hunt,
It was a lot of emotion.
yeah,
It was awesome.
it was a beautiful thing.
I have that memory.
Yeah. All right.
Let's jump into our last thing.
But
So,
when we were talking about this, so you move into a property and there's a monarch or there's a big mature deer. It takes a while for these deer to build back up because, yes, you remove this animal, there's probably going to be another one that might move into that home range, right?
We've ran cameras on this property since, and we don't have one
Or
this caliber yet. And
We've
it's been
we've
3 years.
we've learned, and that's the idea too about getting permission hunting private parcels or public property, is there's areas that a human being has not walked in the last 5 years. And that's typically, it could be the smallest little 100-foot by 100-foot strip or whatever where nobody's ever been in, and that's what houses this buck. And it takes time to build that back up, but you're like, wow, I shot the monster buck. Well, when's the last time somebody's hunted that area? It's obviously a great spot to house an animal and let them grow and survive. But having that and knowing what a whitetail does, I mean, we've walked past deer and they've been bedded behind a deadfall, and when we get past that deadfall, they get up and run away. Why? Because they feel safe, they're protected, they're covered. And same thing with these deer is they choose areas that they can't be seen and they feel comfortable. And whitetails are really good at that. It could be the smallest little bottleneck. It could be the smallest thicket brush. It takes a while. And he was in one of these,
Could
by
be
the way. But just a small little
boat
area.
launch. Remember those ones on the shoreline during gun season that were bedding down in those cattails alongside
They're
that
smart animals.
boathouse?
And when the guns would go off, they would go to this one area, and the neighbor had a nice bird feeder, and they would just go sit down by the bird feeder and just be on the shoreline because nobody ever pressured them down there. They felt safe, and that's kind of the idea. These bucks do end up going to areas. They go to the city woods or whatever it may be where they feel safe late part of that season. Every deer moves a little bit, and same with the collared deer that I talked about. If you watch, why do they go to this area? Why do they go to this area? Why are they over here? Why are they doing this? And it's that timing of the year where they feel safe and comfortable, or they're chasing a hot doe. But you can grow big deer, but we typically have, and we're comfortable with this. It's a 3-year cycle. I mean,
We do it a lot.
If we can shoot a large animal every 3 years and it's one of us 3 brothers, it's a good year. Every year ain't going to be that. Every year we hunt 5 different counties, and we do that for a reason, because we provide a little bit more success to ourselves, and it's more so him and I versus our younger brother, because him and I, it's just something that is dear to our heart, and we like to be together, and we like to travel. Less the last couple of years because I've owned my own woods, and I'm trying to really dial it in. But the idea is it takes time to grow large animals, and unless you have a lot of land, which I don't, it's hard.
We never have.
It's hard to shoot one every single year, but what we've learned through our experiences and hunting multiple areas is we can dial into certain areas and handpick and choose the deer that we want to hunt. And we do have options. There's been many times that we've hunted this deer and we've went out to my woods, and we went central Wisconsin just because we weren't seeing this deer. And the activity was less than par. So having these opportunities, it just so happens in the right place at the right time, and people say that all the time.
It's the magic of deer hunting.
It is.
I don't believe in luck. I believe in a little bit of magic, but we do so much work. You know what I mean? Like, how many deer, like, opening day, double Mac, he got shot because we put in 100 miles.
Sure.
We literally were in the woods in the winter, in the spring. We found the deer sheds. We found beds. We found where we thought they were. Then we started to put in cameras. We tracked them back to where, as they're walking in the woods, until they were caught in daylight. Then we bumped the cameras further, hung a set in the rain, shot them opening day.
True story.
And sometimes that's what it takes.
True story.
Now, okay, so we've talked food plots, a little bit about deer management, buck-to-doe ratios. Just to touch on buck-to-doe ratios before we move into habitat development, because it's a beautiful thing, developing habitat and then seeing it work for you. This is where me and Matt differ. Buck-to-doe ratios, like, I like to have more does because once one's bred, or, you might have some that go into estrus right away, but then some are born later and they go into estrus. I like more does. Matt likes a very competitive. I'm not speaking offline here, right? Like,
I like fighting.
Yeah, he likes more competitive, where there's, let's say, 1 to 2 does in an area and all the bucks are competing after this one doe. Now, I'm not saying either one is right. It's just preference.
It's preference.
It's what I've seen, and then typically what ends up happening on travel corridors and from bedding to feeding. I feel like if there's more does, there's more potential for more bucks to be around, but that's only in the beginning of the rut.
And I feel it's a free-for-all.
Yeah.
Because you have 4-pointers, spikes, 6-pointers, all breeding does.
Yeah, if there's 15 does.
That's the way my property's been, and I've just been nailing does the last few years because...
But why is this?
We're
Talk about your neighbors.
We're different. My neighbors think that
They
you
won't
don't
shoot
shoot does.
Yeah.
So you're out there opening day of gun season, and people are going to laugh, but it's true. 25 deer. 25 deer in front of me at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I can shoot one. I typically don't, because when the bullets start flying, the deer run, and it's kind of nice to just sit out there all opening day, and then eventually that buck comes out on the field and I can shoot my buck, and then I get does other ways, so I'm not too concerned. And obviously I don't see as many deer as I did, last year. I think it was 15 deer opening day, because I'm trying to get this herd number down, because I think it's a little bit out of
We're
whack.
shooting a lot of does.
I'm trying to get it down, but back to the neighbor. The neighbor shoots bucks only.
But any bucks.
And doesn't shoot does. And I told him,
4-pointers up.
Did you get any deer this year? And I was like, yeah, I got a doe in September with my bow. And he's like, oh, that's fantastic that somebody's out here shooting does. And I was like, you don't shoot does? No, I don't shoot does. I shoot bucks only. And then they're out there shooting these little guys. Not that there's anything wrong, because I always felt this way, and having a younger brother that we mentored, as long as you're happy with that harvest, I'm happy for you. But don't come back to deer camp and tell me, I wish I went to shot this deer, because there's bigger ones
Or
out
don't
there.
register it because you shot a small one.
This deer right here, if you're happy to shoot it, and this is one of our first deer when we're just young youths, you shoot this deer, I'm happy for you. Yeah. I'm happy that you're my neighbor and you just shot this deer, because that means you're out of the woods. Yeah. See you later. Because now I can go on big buck mode.
That's why it's on the wall, though. 12 years old, man.
But seriously, my neighbors, when they're like, yeah, we shoot bucks only. You shoot this deer, that's your season. See you later. Yeah. And I love that opportunity. When
you're out of my hair, you're not educating deer anymore. Bye.
He comes to the woods late. It's got a big white flashlight. Deer are just getting spooked, running everywhere. So the moment that this guy shoots his deer and he's tagged out for the year and he's back at deer camp, makes my life a lot easier deer hunting. But each to their own. I've started somewhere as a hunter, and now here I am. And if I want to shoot a larger animal, it takes dedication, it takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes patience.
It takes boot time.
I can shoot a doe. And I'm going to just put this out this because it's really easy. You want a 2.5-year-old 8-pointer? Give me till 4 o'clock tonight, and I'll go out there and I'll shoot one. Because it's so easy to go out and shoot a deer.
I'm talking a 2-year-old that's every day. You can just literally sit on a crop field.
The only reason I say that is I've put it, like he says, boot time. I've put in so much time over the years that I know these transition areas, I know the bedding areas, I know where the deer are. And it's so easy to just go out in the woods and say, all I got to do is sit here, and at 20 minutes to shooting light, these deer are going to come out to this field, and this is where they're going to be.
They're going to be at 30 yards. They're going to eat alfalfa. They're going to put their head down.
Every year,
whack 'em.
Every single year, I can go out into the woods and I can shoot myself a 2.5-year-old easily. This year, I've passed up 4 or 5 really easily, and this is probably that 25 to 16. That, we have deer and we see them and we pass them up. And I'm getting, as I get older, I get a little bit. When you've harvested several nice mature animals in your life, you always want to do something a little bit better. And when you're shooting the same size class animal consistently year in, year out, And I still like to do that and I'll just say, it's hard to shoot. It's hard not to shoot 140, 145 inch deer.
It is really hard to pass them.
You know, and getting yourself your first score for your life, and you shoot 150 inch deer, and you're like, yeah, it's a great deer. And then they're like, finishes at 138 inches. And you're like, what a kick in the nuts. Should have had that deer scored, because you go based off of it's a beautiful deer.
But they're not typical, and they have deductions, and it all gets crazy.
Right, it does get crazy, But you go. I like to go based off of antler growth, and gross antler growth. But
let's jump into our last thing here: habitat development. So, what people don't understand a lot about their woods. They don't understand the canopy structure. They don't understand what it does for any vegetation below. They don't understand invasive species. So, Matt, just, if you would, a condensed version of what does it take to truly own a whitetail habitat that's going to grow big whitetails? Like, what does it take?
diversity.
And then like, what do you do when you find invasives? Like, and like, what is an invasive? Like, if someone's watching, they're like, the heck are they talking about? Right?
So you got your top canopy species, and you got your understory, and you got your shrubs. And then your shrubs in that browse line is what the deer typically eat. And you got your top canopy. So, going to be a nerd into my management, but every story of trees and growth of plants in a woods houses different species of wildlife. You got your birds and your songbirds or whatever, and then in the lower canopy you got more birds and songbirds, and you got squirrels and whatever else, and then you got your mainland, or like us that walk on the earth, that this is what we get to forage on. And based off of species and birds and everything, you can go think of the rainforest. Each different layer of forest canopy houses a different species of animal, and it's very similar in our woods too. I do not just manage for white-tailed deer. I'm a deer hunter. I do not just manage for my deer hunting. I manage for everything, and that includes I manage for turkeys. I manage, and I'd like to see more because I enjoy squirrel hunting, but I manage for squirrels. I manage for grouse. I manage for whitetail or cottonwood rabbits, eastern cottonwoods, and I have woodcock on my property too. And I try to manage for a diversity of things. Not to mention, I've also did some pollinator and butterfly stuff, and that sounds kind of weird, right? But pollinators are important because I have 12 apple trees on my property. And, whether it be butterflies and those things, having pollinators and having a diversity of flowers on my property adds to the pollinators coming to the properties, not just for the apple trees, but keeping pollinators on my woods year round, whether it's spring annuals, summer, fall blossoming stuff. I try to keep as many flowers on my property to keep the diversity and keep the pollinators coming back, because it's important that the pollinators are there to pollinate my apple trees. Now you have cross-pollination, obviously, with different varieties of apple trees, but pollinators play an important role in a lot of different things in this world. But having that diversity and managing a habitat for that diversity is extremely important. I know some people are in my same mentality, and they do what I do, but a lot of people get too focused on white-tailed deer, and they lack on some of those other things. I do a lot of invasive species clearing. When I first purchased my property, I had a lot of honeysuckle, and I had a lot of buckthorn, European and glossy buckthorn.
What'd you do when you found those?
So I typically, I'll mark them. I have flagging tape. I've realized in my experience too, I'll give you a tip. Blue marking tape is the best, because green, pink, orange, all that stuff fades because of the UV, and it turns white after a few years. And when I'm out there making my treatments in the middle of winter, looking for white tape is a pain in the rear end. Blue, for whatever reason, does not color fade. Pink color fades, green, fluorescent green color fades, orange color fades, yellow really color fades. But it happens quick too. But blue, I can get multiple years out of that blue ribbon. But when I find it, typically, I like to go out in my woods and I like to do a lot of walking around and I like to do a lot of assessing. But I'll assess and I'll mark all that stuff so that way, as things are in dormancy, I can go out there and I can cut and I can treat them. Your local co-op can help you with that, but product that is ready to use is Toradon RTU. It's a Corteva product on the marketplace. It's got the dye in it already. You cut it, you treat it, and life is good. There's a xylem and phloem in a plant, and the idea is when it's in dormancy, it's sucking nutrients out of the roots, and water movement isn't there, and phloem is the water movement, and xylem is it's using its own system. So you just treat the outside cambium layer. But the idea there is you can kill a plant by doing that if you're not foliar spraying, and you got some plants that are pop can size. But I do a lot of my treatments, obviously in the winter time with that stuff, and then I pile it. The bummer about buckthorn is it drops a lot of berries. There's not too many things that will browse on it because of the thorns, and that's one way that's easily identifiable is by its thorns. Some birds will eat it, but the bummer there is if wildlife eats any of those berries, they poop them out and they just pretty much will plant them everywhere. Honeysuckle, I don't know too much that forages on honeysuckle, maybe a little bit of songbirds on the berries, the little bit that they have. But I just pile all that up because the idea is you're providing drum areas and cover for the rabbits and the grouse. My rabbit hunting has improved because
what do you do, though?
I have predators out there.
You cut a lot of invasives and then you
I
brush
burned
pile
a lot.
them up, right?
I burned a lot because it was so thick out there.
Of course.
One thing I wanted my dogwoods. There's so many. I have a little bit of gray dogwood, some mulberry, and a lot of red dogwood, and it's competing, and that's what an invasive does. Is it competes for sunlight and nutrients on some of these other native species. So basically, I go out there and I spent a bunch of time at like thousands of plants, but when it was so thick to begin with, I cut a lot of plants, piled them up, and then set them on fire in the middle of winter. I did have a few soda pops. Well, I was burning brush because what else are you going to do besides watch a monster, giant pile of brush just burn? Might as well have a soda pop. And it's cold out. But now that my woods is cleared out after that first initial burn, I can pile some of that stuff up and create habitat areas for some of these species that people don't think about, which, the rabbits and the grouse and the mice and all these things that are super important. So rabbit hunting's fantastic on my woods nowadays because I've been piling brush up now for the last few years, and every time I cut something, I drag something over to the brush pile, and I just keep adding to it. Provides habitat and cover, obviously, from predators. So you want to have more rabbits on your woods, start creating brush piles. I am getting deep. But back to the invasive species stuff is, getting that cleared out so that my desirables, my dogwoods, they can thrive, because you go out there and you see what the browse line is on all this stuff, and you can see what the deer are eating, and those are the things that you want to look for. I've opened the canopy up a little bit in the last, since I've owned my land now for 7 years, going on 8 years, I've planted
how many trees,
about 900 spruce trees.
Just 900 trees.
Planted a total of about 2,500 trees, and I don't own that much land. I got a few hundred of them now on my 5 acres because I'm trying to build some sort of
What kind of trees are you trying to establish?
So I have some wet land. I have some drainage tile on the ag field out there. White spruce is a great product, a great species, excuse me. It does not like wet feet. It does not like shade. And I went to school for 2 years of forestry at Point 2. So I had to look back at my book and why are my trees dying? Oh, yeah. But I've learned that species selection is super important, and I've started to plant more black spruce out there because black spruce can tolerate a little bit more shade, and they can also tolerate some wetter feet. I have a lot of white cedar also that is growing naturally, but everybody thinks, oh, the deer are browsing them off. Not really. A lot of it has to do with the rabbits. I have a high rabbit population out there, and I basket these cedar trees to try to get them up going. Same with my spruce trees. But the rabbits are as big of a problem as the deer are. You get above that rabbit browse line, and then you have to contend with the deer. I've tried the thing that I've realized is I'm trying to build late season habitat for them for sheds and
So they can winter there. Yeah.
Correct. And with softwood and understory like dogwoods, there's a lot of wind movement. There's just no windbreaks for them. And I've cut trees, and I've done the I forget the name of it, and I can't even, it just blows my mind. But hinge cut. I've done hinge cuts out there and tried that. But with some of the softwood that I have, the hinge cuts don't typically always work. I've noticed where I have these brush piles too for rabbits and grouse and things that the deer will actually bed right next to them to get out of the wind. So those have created habitat for the deer because now there's an opportunity for a windbreak for that. But the goal of me doing these plantings in the future, and I'm selectively planting these spruce trees, and then also the cedars, is I want habitat. It's not food. I mean, they're going to eat it, but I want windbreaks. I want these small pockets in my woods for them to feel comfortable that I know they're going to be in there in the future, and these are areas that I can stalk and hunt, and that's kind of the goal of me doing that. I'm selecting areas in my woods. I'm also, my neighbor, we lease kind of some of his land too, and I've asked permission, do you mind if I plant some of these trees in your woods, because I'm trying to
Thicken it up.
get it thicker, because in this one area of my woods, I got 65 trees planted. It's just this tiny little area like the size of my deer plot. The idea is I can selectively
like 1 acre
transplant. I can transplant them, or I can cut them out in the future and thin them. But the idea is if it gets thick enough where it can provide cover out of shade. They like shade when it's hot. If it can provide a windbreak when it's cold and miserable for them, they're going to utilize it. And now I know that they are because I'm providing it. It's an area I can go up there with my shotgun or my muzzleloader or whatever it may be, and I can stalk a deer and get nice up and close and personal with them. And that's what I'm looking for, is I'm trying to improve that habitat, provide forages. So the neat thing with dogwoods is you can actually prune them and you can stick them in the soil and you can propagate them.
Basically
and grow
replant
them.
pieces, yeah.
It's super neat. And now that I've cleaned out the understory of invasive species, the glossies and the honeysuckles, people like it because like, oh, it's cover, it's great. It is. It's awesome. These phragmites that are out in the countryside. The problem with that is it's invasive species and it's competing against sunlight. And it's also competing for other things.
Cattails.
And if it gets thick enough, nothing else can grow there but that, and it's undesirable. When I look at something that I want on my property, I want it to provide a value to the resources I have. And it provides no value besides it being thick enough for a deer just to want to move through it. You can have thick dogwoods, you can have thick aspen, you can have thick cedars, you can have things that are native to Wisconsin that provide just as much value, and they can forage on it too. They do not forage on this stuff. So when people talk about phragmites, it's competing against cattails. There are some cattails that are native, and there's some of them that aren't, and I understand that. But when you get a thatch layer that's that's probably too much, 2 feet thick, with phragmites, nothing else is going to grow in there. I've seen cedar trees, I've seen birches, I've seen spruce trees grow in cattail thatch. You can't say that about phragmites. And if you think how great it is, drive through Green Bay and go over the Tower Drive Bridge. It's just nuts.
What is everything that we're talking about in this whole episode? I'll tell you. Deer season never ends for this family.
No, it doesn't.
We have immersed our whole life around deer hunting season. We really have. I mean,
I could talk all day about deer hunting and habitat management, as you kind of understand here. I get lost
January
in some
the
of the
season
things that I like
ends.
to talk
February
about.
we pick it right back up. What are we doing? We're finding beds so we can find sheds. So we can GPS locate them. So we can go back and we can track the travel corridors and we can put out cameras. Now we put out mineral sites or create overhanging branches and mock scrapes, and what else are we doing? We're creating food plots, and we're trying to get them to frequent our property a little bit more, to come to our property a little bit more, and then we're putting out cameras and we're tracking what age groups we have, how many deer we have. Now we're creating plans. Like literally everything we do has to do with deer hunting year round, and it's just part of the lifestyle that we live. It's why I created this podcast. It's why deer season never ends, because when we were 12 years old, we were blessed to have a father that took us out in the woods. He showed us how to read track, how to find out where the deer are. He taught us about deer yards. We hunted them on the ground. We did the hardest thing first. Open blinds, moving on deer. We learned all the necessary skills to harvest deer and got really good at it before we ever went in the air, like everybody else has learned.
It started with scouting for us.
Yeah.
Dad was really good. Dad was in the Vietnam War, and he was really good at tracking. And that's one thing that he taught us, is to sit still, be quiet, walking into the woods. Don't make a sound when you walk into your stand, but to how to find deer and how to track them. And that's where our hunting success has grown from, is those roots of sitting on the ground at nose level with deer, close enough that you could poke them with a knife or your forefinger.
Not knowing we're there.
And then finding them, Do not sit in the woods in the same spot saying, man, I haven't seen any deer in 3 days. Well, how about you break at, like, say, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning
Scouting?
and do some scouting?
Yeah.
Or, hey, I've seen the same buck over there on the fence row every night for the last 2-3 nights. Why haven't you pulled your set and moved half the distance?
Oh, he's talking about getting aggressive. I like that. Because,
You know?
literally, I'll move right away. I see a buck in the morning opening day. I'm moving to the same trail, maybe
Cut
80,
half the
90
distance.
Yes.
If he's 60 yards over there and he's too far, because that 60 yards is too far for me. Let's say you move 30 yards closer. Now you have a 30-yard shot to where you are, or 50-yard shot, which is, if you're 20 yards off of a trail. But cover half the distance, because how many times are you going to sit in that deer stand all season long? I had the same deer, and he was crossing that fence row, and I couldn't get a shot. He was too far away. Well, you dummy. Get closer to him. Do something instead of just standing there. It's like, there's the same deer out in my field every day, and I'm looking at him from the side of my truck and out of my window. Well, don't just sit there and watch them. Do something about it. Like, go over there and drag a drag with some dopey. Bring them right into your stand, or think outside the box.
How does our deer season always start? By figuring out what deer are around, what deer are left, and then we start planning, how are we going to get them to frequent where we are?
Yes. How do we bring them into us?
Around all of that, we check our gear, we make sure we're safe,
Scouting
we make sure
scouting is
train.
super important.
All of it is part of it. Every time you're in the woods, you should be picking up knowledge. If you think you're just going to go out there and it's just to find sheds and you're not looking at new stand locations or new trails, you're not putting down waypoints, you're doing a disservice to yourself as a hunter to not take in all the information every time you're in.
There's been a lot of times I've been on public land and, ooh, this is a good spot. And I've gotten done hunting and you hear a noise. You hear something. And you can't see them, but you saw something move through the brush. I promise you, get down from that deer stand and go to that spot where you heard them and look for tracks. Usually, it's a buck in that cover that doesn't want to be seen, and now set yourself up how you can hunt that trail. Many times I've been in a spot and I'm like, this is a great spot, and I've hung a set and I've had to move my stand 2 or 3 times in order to see a nice mature deer. And that's very important, is don't be satisfied with what you have when it comes to hunting. Because when you sit in a spot and you're like, ooh, this is good. For instance, It could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes before shooting light and you can't see a dang thing. Where did those deer come from and where did they go? How about you get out of your deer stand when it's nice and light and the deer activity has declined, whether it's 9
Like
o'clock.
after a morning hunt is perfect.
Get down and head in the direction they just left. And find out if you can give yourself 5 minutes, if you can give yourself 10 minutes, because let's be honest, deer browse. But just move a little bit further away. Move a little bit further away. That's how this buck and a few other bucks have been shot in our lives, is go where they're going and provide yourself more daylight. Or let's just say, in the evening hours, the deer are coming in too late. Well, why don't you move to the direction that they're coming from and allow yourself more sunlight,
Some of that
daylight.
comes down to gear setup, though, too, right? Like, if you don't
True.
have sticks in the stand, you're not doing that. It's going to get a lot harder
Going
if
to
you're
a
trying to
swamp
do a
and
tree
you're
climber.
silhouetted.
If you think you're going to sit on the ground in a mirror blind or a
there's a
ground
lot that
blind,
goes to
yeah, a lot goes with it. So I think we'll wrap up here, and I'll say this. Like, the last couple episodes, we talked a lot about what it's like to hunt, the style that I like to hunt, or like our family likes to hunt. Today I promised we'd talk all things deer management, food plots, habitat development. If you guys have more questions, please just hit us up in the comments. Let us know what's on your mind, especially if we got some questions going now that we've started this conversation. But at the end of the day, Matt, what does deer hunting mean to you? What did Dad instill in us that you would say to our audience that really, what is deer hunting?
Family.
Amen.
Family, camaraderie, safety.
I know someday when I'm old and I'm just sitting in a kill station, I'm going to enjoy those days where I get to just share all the information with everybody in deer camp and then send them out and hope they can go do what I did 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
And crush it. But the only way we're going to keep deer hunting going is to pass along information. That's what this podcast is all about.
So one thing that he kind of mentioned about mentoring and next generations is, and I might butcher it, but Theodore Roosevelt obviously was a pioneer of our natural resources, and he always said, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but manage these resources for this generation and the next generation to come. And the idea of that is don't abuse the resources we have. We need to manage them, because one day for him, he would like to take his granddaughter out there and fish and have the same luxury that we do today with the resources that are provided for us.
Absolutely.
And if we abuse the things that we have and we don't manage correctly, we over-harvest, those resources will be lost. So there's some things that Mr. Roosevelt was very knowledgeable about, and that saying is very true, that we need to manage these resources for this generation, but also the next generations to come, because it's a resource we have and it's a resource we rely on. That's who we are.
That was nice. May have butchered it, but it was still awesome.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Deer Season Never Ends, Episode 3. Thank you for tuning in to the podcast. We'll see you next week.